which is left over from last time. Okay, we're going to keep going with our great adventure in Chassidut here. So if we're just going to back up a tiny bit to this Mamar Heichal 2 to the Perek Gimel, and we're learning about what is the significance of Moshe having to do battle with Midian before he dies. So Perek Gimel. As we pointed out last time, that Midian, the word Midian itself means quarrel, to be divisive. This is the very essence of the klipah, of the forces of concealment of holiness, of what Midian is all about. That's divisiveness and dividing up. This is the very essence of baseless hatred and division of heart. So it's in there. It's chapter 3.
Chapter 1.
Okay. It's in there. This is the exact polar opposite of the side of holiness. Because of holiness. What's that? Chapter 3. Because of holiness is unity. So then what's the opposite of holiness? The opposite of holiness is then division. And this is also reflected in Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. If you remember, when Hashem says they're going to get vengeance against the Midyanim, it says that it's going to be Nikmat B'nai Yisrael, a vengeance on behalf of B'nai Yisrael. But then when Moshe then gives that mitzvah, he says it's going to be Nikmat Yud Kei Vav Kei, a vengeance on behalf of Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's because Yud Kei Vav Kei, that name of Hashem, represents Bechinat Yichud Kalut, the very essence of unity. So Midyan and Yud Kei Vav Kei are polar opposites. Chochma umidot kedusha, v'hagam shehu bechinat eses sefirot mochin umidot. Kol makom hein bechinat yichud v'kalut v'gamri. So even though when we talk about Hashem's expression in the world, that's the 10 sefirot, that's how Hashem expresses himself outward, that we have these divisions because there's the 3 intellectual sefirot, chochma u'midat, and then the 7 more emotional sefirot, the Chesed Nesachot Yesod Malchut. So that sounds like division, but in fact they are all unified. B'shorish inyan ha'klipa the hefech, but klipa, the force of concealment, are forces that are the polar opposite that divide. Zeh b'chinat ha'perud v'yichal v'dafka. V'zeh shamar Yaakov yesh li kol. That's why Yaakov said about himself, yesh li kol, I have everything. Mm-hmm. What's the word kol mean? All. Yeah, all. His all expresses the idea of oneness. Kol, right? Yesh li kol. Lashon hikalut. Matter of fact, the word inclusiveness becomes the word kol. In Hebrew, hikalut, or the klal. Klal Yisrael? Klal Yisrael? That's the word klal. Unity, inclusiveness. And so when Yaakov said, Yesh li kol, because Yaakov said, that's what I stand for, right? Esav Amar Yesh li, Esav said, Rav, what does Rav mean? Lashon Ribui Perud, it means multiplicity. What's the what's the opposite of oneness? Plurality. Right?
God made the world set for plurality and duality because we're not just one.
So we're talking in very deep Kabbalistic analysis of that in the very next chapter. We'll discuss that exact point. What's the relationship between like multiple parts but unity? So we'll talk more about that. So we see the same thing with Yaakov. So, Yaakov, when he came down to Egypt, so the Torah describes he came down with 70 souls. But there's something, and everybody who's been learning a little bit of Hebrew, so maybe a lot of Hebrew, so the Torah says, Shivim Nefesh. So Nefesh is a soul. Can anybody tell me what number that is? In other words, is it singular or plural? singular.
Well, it'd be singular.
Yeah, because how would you say plural? Nifashot. Well, that was good. You get a good grading up on there, right? But it says he came with 70 souls. If you wrote in English a paper, you're at Rio Americana High School. I came with 70 soul. you flunk, right? Yeah. Okay. So that's because why? Because Yaakov represents, even though there are 70, it's one. Because that's the idea of unity. Behind kanal de besitra de kedusha agam sheyesh al sach gimel sichlim v'shev midot. So even though you have these kind of component parts of the three intellectual components and the seven more emotionally related components, we call makom him b'chinat yichud b'tachlit. But when it comes to Yaakov, you show holiness, but everything's in a state of unity. Esav, when it comes to Esav, hayarak shisha nefashot. But the Torah describes Esav as having 6 nefashot, the descendants of Esav. 6 nefashot. So nefashot. What person is that? Plural. Uchtiv nefashot lashon rabbi, because Esav is multiplicity, division. Yaakov is unity. Because this represents the root of their souls in the higher sphirot, in the higher spiritual world. The tohu, coming from the world of tohu. Shahayu b'chinat anfin mitpardim. Shamidot tohu lo hayu chalim lisbol. Now here we're going to allude to a very deep Kabbalistic concept that, amazingly enough, and this always happens. We actually talked about this in the Wednesday night class, that we talked about the idea of Shirat HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels, and we talked about the image of how that process took place, and we talked about the idea of letters using the image of letters of words. Okay. Whenever you talk about the idea of a letter, it's really better to talk about consonants. So in Hebrew, it's consonants, right? So each consonant represents there's kind of a divisiveness, because what happens is the air comes out of your right. That air is oneness. Breath. That's oneness. The air. Then what happens? It becomes then modulated, separated by going through the mouth, and the mouth being formed in very different ways. And people who are speech therapists, that's what they do for a living. Right, to figure out why the person can't say certain letters based upon, what's your mouth. Yeah, well, it all ultimately goes up to there. So that's how Hashem, in order to go from absolute oneness, right, which exists before the world, right, into that there should be a world that had to go through the modulation of oneness into distinct consonants. Right, to use that metaphor. The only problem is that you can then go into a larger state of disunity. Okay, so let's say, this is the image we gave before. I think it's a great image. So let's say you have 3 consonants. Okay, for some reason, because when I was a little kid, in order to learn how to conjugate Hebrew verbs, I don't know why they always use the word shin memresh, which means to guard. Okay. Like ani shamarti, ata shamarta, at shamar, tu shamar, he shamar, whatever. It's like, in academic circles, they use the root kuf tet lama, which means to kill. I killed, you killed, she killed. It's like it's like, oh my God, that is a guard. So, but it's funny, in university circles, that's the academic circles, they use, I don't know why. So, but in any case, if you take so the first step in that creation is you take kind of the raw oneness of the breath, and then it has to be then channeled in these very specific ways with the mouth. So you get a sh, a m, and a r, right? Those 3 constants. Okay, but there's a harmony there. Why? Because the shin, m, and the r, you put them next to each other, and then it's a word. It's a coherent word. But as we pointed out on Wednesday night, if you would take the shin and put it over there, and the mem and put it over there and the resh over there. You're writing on the board, right? But the letters are not connected to each other. Then what do you have? Nothing. You just got chaos. So that is the ultimate disaster, as it were, of the process of creation, that you had this kind of division into powers of the Sphirot, but then fracturing so that the letters no longer perform any kind of coherent harmony. Because when you have the letters next to each other, there is a kind of a harmony, right? But if the letters have nothing to do with each other, then there's no harmony. So that's what he's saying here. That in the level of tohu, that level of creation, that world of tohu, so the letters can't tolerate each other. The chesed lo hayta yechola lisbol mitat hagvura, that the attribute of chesed couldn't tolerate the attribute of gvura. When two people can't tolerate each other, what do? They fight and they stay away from each other. So they separate. So that's the Shin Mem and Resh. They don't get along anymore. If they were next to each other holding hands and you've got a coherent word, but once the Shin Mem Resh can't get along, then you just have chaos. Okay? So that's what he's describing here. V'chein gvurat midat ha'chesed v'chein kli bahem v'yimloch v'yamot. K'yadua shezah shemizen na'aseh inyan ha'perud v'klipa v'sitra achra. Okay, so that's the idea of this ultimate aspect of klipa, of midyan, which is the business that nothing can interrelate to each other. That's the idea of the ultimate breaking of the vessels. That's that image in Kabbalah, very famous image of the world of Tohu. That all the midot were in the level of Perut, of separation. That's why now we're starting to get deep there. Remember, we pointed out before that there's the 7 Canaanite nations and there's Midian. We talked about it a little bit. Moria, how come they're not included? How come Midian is not one of the 7 Canaanite nations? He's about to explain. The Sheva Umot Knani Hachiti, the 7 Canaanite nations, they are the different articulations of different midot. Kol Echad Midah Pratit, to Knani, Chesed, Titi, Gvura. Each of the 7, you see there's 7 midot, 7 the lower emotional traits. It's not a coincidence that there are, we just turned the page in the Hebrew. It's not a coincidence that there are 7 midot and 7 Canaanite nations. Why? Because each one of the Canaanite nations is related to the, so hang on, so let's just read a little bit more. The kol achadu klipa pratik midat pratiketo. Each one of them is one of the 7 midot, umineged l'midah pratik kedusha. And each one of them represents the polar opposite of the same attribute, but the realm of kedusha, right? Everything is in polar opposites. We're on page Nun Vav at the top. Okay? Not just let me finish it, and then we'll see if we have time for questions. Klipat midyan eno midah pratit. But midyan, remember, it's not one of the 7 nations. Why not? What is it? How's it different? Kimi klalut inyan hato. It represents the kind of the essence and the universal nature of the realm of tohu. Shu inyan haperut. It's the very essence of divisiveness. In other words, you can have, maybe the way to say this, I just thought of an English word. You know what's good? There's good things about English. It's not the holy tongue, but it's got a lot of words in it. So it's good. It's good to. So the difference between individuation, you can use that word, right? So the 7 midot represented by the Canaanite nations, that's individuation, right? They're individual, and each one of them, in its individual character, has the holy aspect of it and the unholy aspect of it, right? The way expressed in holy, expressed in unholiness. But that's not true of Midyan. Midyan is not one aspect of individuation. It's the very core of divisiveness. That's different than individuation. שזהו הכלל שהיה בכללותו, שהיו בבחינת אנפי נפרדים, וזה הייתה סיבת השבירה. This is, of course, the ultimate cause of the breaking of the vessels in Kabbalah. The Tohu, מה שנשתלשלו, השבע מידות רעות ומצד הפירוד. That you had this differentiation and divisiveness, שהיה בתוהו, זהו סיבת הכללית השבירה, דקלים בתוהו. That flows from the attribute of midyan. Midyan is not a kind of expression of individuation, it's the very essence of divisiveness. וזהו עניין קליפת מדין למטה, שאינה בכלל השבע עולמים, לפי שאינה במידה פרטית, אם בכללותו. It's not one aspect of individuation, but it's the very primal urge of divisiveness. It's the very root and source of shvira, of the breaking of the vessels. Okay, so we finished chapter 3. Yeah.
If I hadn't seen this, I would have thought all the descriptions you would have told me about Midian would be Amalek.
Okay, excellent point. And so I need to think about that, and it could be you're 100% right. It could be you're right. Yeah. So. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but it also says God is going to do war with Amalek from generation to generation.